Hello Potters, and welcome back to the Pottery Plus Studios. I wanted to talk about pyrometric cones today because I think this can be a confusing topic, but it's kind of vital information to know if you're ever going to fire your own kiln, or just even kind of understand the temperature range that we're speaking about when we're talking about different firing processes for pottery. So in thinking about this video, I've sort of broken it down into like what is a physical cone, and then like the language of cones and the pyrometric cone chart, because pyrometric cones have to do with temperatures, but instead of just saying what temperature we want, we correlate it with a cone when we're speaking about it. And it can be a bit confusing, but I just want to try to give you some basic information about it today. And then if you want more, you can always let me know. But this was something that I found in years past, former students would kind of struggle with understanding the concept of cones. And I think that had I thought to share what I'm going to share with you today, it would have been a lot easier for them. But, you know, in an educational setting, sometimes you just can't always stop and go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. But when I'm here in my studio alone, I can. So let me show you like a physical cone and tell you what they do. So this is a box of cones. These are 06 cones. There are different sizes. These ones that I'm going to show you are considered like large. They come in a box with foam because they're kind of breakable, and they look like this. And there's usually an indicator, or always an indicator on the side of what temperature they melt at, essentially. So, and that kind of, it's a good entryway into how these work. So before there were digital panels on kilns, and before there were thermometers that you could put in kilns that would tell you what temperature your kiln was at a particular point in the firing process, instead of that, we would use cones, because cones come in materials that melt at different temperatures. So sometimes the way that you use a cone is just you have a single cone that melts at the top temperature you're looking for in your kiln, and you wait until that cone is melted. Particularly in like older style electric kilns, I believe I'm understanding this right, but the cone melts and it trips like a shut off. So you could, there would be a porthole where you could view your cone, but then also eventually it became where the cone melting would shut the kiln down. Okay. That was kind of the step in between like having to babysit and watch for the cone to melt, and what we have now with our digital panels that are so wonderful. So the way that a cone tells you information is by melting, okay? The other way that you use them, a little bit more complicated version, is like, say if you were firing a gas kiln to a relatively high temperature, which would be cone 10, which is about 2,400 degrees, you set up a series of cones, and that way you can track the progress. So you might start with an 06 cone and progressively put a little series of cones in your kiln that you could then look through and see through a porthole in the kiln. And as each one melts, you know, okay, we're now at this temperature. Now we're at this temperature until you get to your desired temperature. And that's always really helpful because you can tell if your heat is stalling out when you're doing a process where, like with a gas kiln, you're kind of manually controlling the flow of air and fuel of gas that's going through that kiln. We call it an atmospheric kiln. And so if something starts to go wrong and your temperature starts to not move, you can tell by checking your cones. And I spent a lot of time doing that in college, so I do have experience with that. But yeah, as each one starts to tip, you can just see your progress. And it's really the only bit of information you have if you don't have a digital thermometer in there. So we used to rely super heavily on these as information for what was going on in our kiln. But in like my kiln that I have now, it's electric, and everything that I do is in electric. So I don't have any purpose for physical cones. Okay. But now we're getting into the language part of it. We still call different temperatures and temperature ranges by cones. So getting away from this and getting more into like how a cone indicates a temperature, there's a chart called the Pyrometric Cone chart. I'll show an example here for you. As a side, I personally think this should be I don't usually see graphics where it's organized like more like a time, like a number line, but I think, I don't know, in my head that makes more sense visually than like where it's just in columns. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. That could just be a me thing. But as of right now, although we are in less and less need of using physical cones, and mind you, I still think there will be people whose process will require physical cones. It's just becoming less, but we are still going to use the word cone when we're talking about certain temperatures. So for example, a very low cone is cone 018. That's 1300 degrees. That's like a temperature that I've used. Oh, hi Birdie, my puppy's here. 018 is a temperature that I've used for like setting iron decals onto a finished piece. Cone 06 is about 1800 degrees, and that's like a very common bisque temperature. And then everything in between going all the way up to like the highest cone, I think gets around like 25 or 2600 degrees. We call it cone 12. So we go from those like ones with the 0 in front of it that we call O and then the number, and then it goes up, and when you get past 0, you go into like where the numbers, the higher the number is, the higher the temperature. But it's opposite when you're below 0. So that gets kind of complicated for people because it's like cone 018 is very low compared to cone 2. So, you know, when people hear that 18, even though it's 018, or we don't call it 018, but it's an 18 with a 0 in front of it, it's hard to sort of get it in your mind that like that 018 is very low and 2 is kind of mid actually in the whole spectrum of the thing. So something I've kind of been thinking about in getting ready for this video is like, if you're in a setting where physical cones aren't used, maybe we could streamline and it would just be a little bit easier to say, I'm doing a bisque fire to 1800 degrees. Like, I don't know. Would that like maybe kind of revolutionize things a little bit for spaces where we aren't using physical cones? Because that's a lot, I don't know, easier for people to understand. Like cones have gotten so ingrained in like the vernacular of talking about different cone temperatures, but it really takes, you have to spend a lot of time, or I did, I don't know, maybe other people pick up on it quicker than me, but it took me a long time to really get it like memorized in my mind, the general layout of the cone chart and what people meant when they referenced different cone numbers. So I don't know. I think, you know, if I were teaching a beginner class again, I would say I would maybe start off with temperatures and like when I was speaking about it, like tell them the temperature that each process was going to, and then maybe get into cones later. Like, because it's just a whole other, it's a whole other piece to understand when you're already trying to learn so much about all the different aspects of the pottery process. So I don't know. Anyway, let me know what you think. I hope that's not like a controversial topic or anything. It doesn't seem like using the term, you know, cone 6 to talk about 2200 degrees, just cutting that out would be too controversial, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe there's an aspect of it that I'm not seeing, but I don't know. And I do just mean in particular for beginners. Like if we don't explain what cones are, that's kind of a vital piece of information that I think can be, you know, and it's something I used to just, it didn't occur to me to necessarily explain it in great detail to my beginner students. And so I just kind of wonder, you know, how many times was someone like, oh, are we supposed to know what cone 6 means? Like, you know, and just kind of, yeah, just not address it. I think maybe that's where I'm going with this. Maybe I just wish we talked about it more. All right, if you're still here, thank you for joining me to the end. This is a bit of a dry topic, but for those of you who might be in that space where like you've heard the terms, but you don't know exactly what it means, I hope this helped. I hope you have a lovely, however long in between our next video, honestly. My schedule is crazy in October, so hopefully I'm gonna do my best to keep up though. So I'll see you on the next one, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.